Darshidelek friends, welcome back to the Picture Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, especially on Spotify. Today, our special guest is Chithue Lobsang Sither. This episode is meant for anybody who wants to learn more about cybersecurity in Tibet. What does it feel like to be a UC Berkeley Fellow? Or what does it feel like to be on the cover of Wired magazine with Google CEO or Amal Clooney? We also talk about the Tibetan Parliamentarian and a little bit about Tibetan politics as well. So stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Welcome to Pija Podcast.
Awesome. Lobsang Sither, Tojanang for coming to the Pija Podcast. How are you this morning in India?
Thank you, Cerubla. First of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. Yeah, I'm doing good. It's a really nice morning. Yeah.
You didn't. What time did you go to bed last night? You went pretty late, right?
Yeah, I think it was around 1 or something.
Wow. And you woke up at what time?
I only got up around 8, so I didn't get up
Okay.
that early.
Okay,
So I
not
had
bad, not
to sleep.
bad.
Yeah, that's good
Yeah.
enough.
Can we start off with your room, your house? It looks so
Yeah.
different from every other house I've been in India. Did you guys
Okay.
build it or did you guys buy it like that? Like it looks so nice.
So me and my wife, so we moved to South India like about a year and 8 or 9 months ago. So we were living in Dharamsala for the last like more than 10 years, for more than a decade. So we moved to South India and we built our own home. So this house is a vision of my partner and my wife. So it's more about like it's a very like vernacular architecture. So it's building with traditional materials and stuff like that. So if you look at the walls, it's mud bricks. So it's something called like CSEB, which is like stabilized earthen bricks. So this is about 90% mud, 10% sand, and only 10% cement. So there's very less usage of cement. There's no paint. So it's all natural colors, whatever it is. So it's really good for your health. And it's also like really good for the environment as well. So this was a vision that she had that I supported. So to be very honest, it's not something that I know a lot about, but it's something that I feel is really good if you really want to implement kind of like trying to have I guess, a more conscious living in some ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, using certain things like that, I guess.
Does your wife work in the environment space or your sustainability
Oh.
space or no?
So she used to be the Voice of America Tibetan Service Bureau Chief in Dharamsala, and she
Oh,
currently still works for Voice of America, and she's working with Reporters Without Borders as a correspondent as well. So she's a journalist by profession, but she's passionate about the environment, passionate about I guess in that space a lot. So that's why.
got it, got it. So it's something she just like interested in, learns on her own.
Yeah, it's something that she's really interested in and learns on her own. Yeah.
So can you help me make the connection? How does like a mud house using not too much cement, how's that help good for your health and like environment?
So what happens is like when you build with traditional, like kind of like the modern materials, right? Like when you're building with cements and stuff like that, what happens is like uh, it really stops the breathability of a lot of the materials because cements is something that's not breathable. So mud bricks are always breathable. So for example, like you don't really need to use a lot of electricity for these places, right? So we don't have ACs, even though it tends to, even if it does get hot, it becomes cooler inside, and when it's cold outside, it's a bit warmer inside. So it helps with a lot of like it's part of the natural process, right? Like so, this is how houses were built traditionally, right? Like even in northern India, southern India, and different parts of India. So I think that's part of it. And secondly, like when you're not using a lot of paints have I don't want to go into tirade here, but like
Right.
with paints, it's always the toxicity and all of that. So that reduces a lot of that. So I think those are different elements of it. So, and if you see the reason why it looks like big is because like there's no walls per se. So this is like my office and our office, but that side is our bedroom and all of that. So it's private space, but like we don't really have a lot of walls. So there's a lot more free flowing of air. So cooling and all of that, right? So that's part of it. And I think, and then if you're using mud, right, it's something that is coming out of the ground. So you don't really, it doesn't go through a process. And these are stabilized earthen bricks, so it doesn't really have to be fired, right? Like a traditional brick. So a traditional brick is fired in the kiln, so that is like it becomes more stable. However, this is cured for about 20 to 25 days once it is like compressed. So there's certain elements of it which makes it more environmental friendly, but at the same time, it also becomes a bit more sustainable and more cost effective as well.
That that's awesome. Is it
Yeah.
is it is it more expensive than like using cement or no?
No, it actually reduces a lot of the costs if you're able to do it yourself. However, there is a bit of a challenge in trying to find people who can do it. So
Mm.
we were lucky that we found people who can do it, and like we had a really good contractor locally that was able to help us with that. So yeah, it works out. But like if you're trying, because there's always the thing about I guess more vernacular architecture, which is like it's not going to be as beautiful or as shiny or as kind of like clean as a modern house. So, for example, we've been all the flooring is like stones, it's like traditional stones, which are much cheaper, but
Mm.
it's not going to be plain. It's not going to be like the super smooth thing that happens like with most modern houses. So, I think there's some back and forth, and then you have to be very careful about the weather, the environmental. Like, so for example, if there's a lot of rain, you have to figure out how do you protect your home from rain, because like we don't really have paints on the outside as well, so you have to figure out how to protect those and stuff like that. So it's a bit more. It takes more time. It takes a bit more research, but yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's looks super cool. All the houses in the US are made of like wood and very flimsy, but super expensive.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think there's a misconception that like vernacular or traditional architecture tends to be more expensive, which I think is also because of like has become more of an elite thing in certain parts of India, right, in the cities and everything. However, I think during our process, right, we actually found that this is actually much cheaper than building like traditional, like the conventional cement houses, as long as you understand like where you can get certain elements of it and where you actually have to compromise, right? So in certain spaces where you have to compromise, whether it's about the ceiling and stuff like that, whether it's about all the lighting that people really like, whether it's like if you look at around here, like you can see some of the lighting uh kind of wires, so it won't be able to go inside, so that it kind of sticks out and stuff like that. So if you're okay with stuff like that, I think it works out. But if you're not, then if you want everything in a really clean manner, that's where it becomes a bit more challenging.
I thought it was like one of the Zoom video filter backgrounds. Yeah, looks super cool. What made you want to move out of Dharamsala?
So I think we've been in Dharamsala for almost more than a decade. I mean, both of us were born there, so we've lived there almost all our lives, apart from like our colleges and when we were like in different parts of India doing our studies, right? Uh, I think there's like two different reasons, right? Part of the reason was my parents are here, so my grandparents, like, so they were here, so it was like okay, we wanted to be somewhere that we were a bit closer to them, so that we can be there for them if it's required. That was part of the reason. The second part was also like I think we wanted to be a bit away from Dharamsala so that like it's a bit of a slower lifestyle, and we've never really lived in the Tibetan settlements, right? So it's something that and there's farming, there's a lot of like space to do a lot of those things. So I think that is something that we wanted to do, and we also wanted to build a home. So there's more space that's available out here. So I think those were part of the reason, and I think it's also about uh when I think like 2020 and everything, like, and this was a plan that we had for the last 7 or 8 years, so it wasn't something that was sudden. So it's like maybe around 2015, 2016 where we decided like okay, we were planning to move down, it was just a matter of when. So I think after COVID it was like okay, I think it's the right time to move so that like we can be closer to our family, at the same time take a bit of a step back and try to think about like make more conscious choices. But at the same time, because of, I think with technology, right? What is interesting now is like you can really work from anywhere, which wasn't possible earlier, right? And Belakopit now has like some like really great internet connections and everything, which wasn't there before. So it kind of came at the opportune time. So we were able to move where everything, the infrastructure and everything was great here, that allowed us to like at least work from home without facing a lot of the difficulties which we might have faced a few years back.
Mm. When we like from like an outside perspective, when we learn about India or like whatever, like Nepal, we hear them as like developing countries, right? Economically developing countries. But then, the last time I went to India was pre-pandemic. Or last time I went to India was in this year, but before that, it was like pre-pandemic 2018. And then the leap in technology that they've made is incredible. Like my Bala side is from Mongolia, and now they have like before not reliable like electricity, of course, no internet. Everybody like was like on using like their phone network and data, but now everyone has Wi-Fi. And then one other cool thing is that we just got here in America where you can use to pay with your phone, right? But now you guys can scan QR codes, which I was like, wow, that's like such a good idea. And nobody carries cash anymore in India either. It's like those leaps in technology is crazy, even though like it's a quote unquote developing country.
Yeah, I think especially like technology leaps, right? Like especially I think when you're talking about it's like the UPI payment interface, like the unified payment interface, and that's something that India developed in the last few years, right? And you will see it almost everywhere, right? And people use it to pay for like 5 cents, 10 cents, 20 cents, right? It's not something like, oh, we only use it if you want to pay for a huge amount of money. It's like, it's for everything. And the fact that it's seamless, it works like almost all the time. I've only had it break down maybe once or twice in the last few years that I've used it, right? So it becomes and that changes a lot of the dynamics in terms of like portability, accessibility, and all of that. So I think that's interesting. And in terms of the internet, right? So for example, in Belkopi right now, there's like Air Jaldi, which provides not like only Wi-Fi services, but they provide broadband. So it's like high-speed internet, right? We have about 100, 120, 120 Mbps speed. There's Airtel, which gives you around 200, 300. There's BSNL. So there's like so many providers which provide high-speed internet in a settlement, right? So that kind of reduces a lot of the accessibility issues, right? And that's not just in the Tibetan settlements, it's everywhere. So I think India has changed a lot. And because it is a developing country, like I think there are certain parts of India where they are still developing, but I think in a lot of other places, like it has changed a lot. And I think you probably noticed it, like, I mean, like as you said, when you went to Mangot, right?
One thing that shocked me when I came here this past year was when I arrived in New Delhi and then I traveled outside, the amount of electric vehicles that are like taxi electric vehicles was crazy to me because in the US we just had like the electric vehicle boom, but in India it's like it's happening here as well, which was like maybe it's like a G20 thing. Maybe India wants to maybe show off a little bit, but like still, it's still crazy that they have these ecosystems in place, which I found absolutely mind blowing. You know. Look, did you grow up in Belugubula in Lobsang?
Uh, no, so I was born in Dharamsala, so I did all my schooling from Upper TCV. So basically, I was born in TCV. So because like I wasn't really born there, but I sometimes say like I was born in TCV because my parents worked in TCV. So I was born in Dharamsala, like lived almost all my life up there, like apart from the college times. So that was like yeah, I wasn't born in South India, like even though technically my mom's from a mom's side, like they're from Belkupi, but like it was just my grandma and grandfather at that point, like so I've never really lived here that much.
Mhm. And then for college and after that, where did you travel and stuff?
So I did my undergraduate from Chennai, Loyola College in Chennai, so in southern India, that's in Tamil Nadu. And then for my masters I was in the UK where I did software engineering.
Mhm. And what's your you have some sort of affiliation with UC Berkeley. What is it that? Is that for a graduate program or fellowship?
Yeah, so you're with UC Berkeley, like I was an advisor for about 2 years. So there was a program that was looking at long-term security. So it's a center called long-term security. So it's looking at like how security kind of works for the long term, right? As the name suggests. So it was looking at like different communities and how they actually build resilience on digital threats and stuff like that. So, and it's also about like how the graduate program at UC Berkeley, how that can actually understand the real world problems, right? So for me to be part of that was about like sharing the issues that the Tibetan community faces and kind of looking at like solutions and the solutions that we found, how that can be implemented in other parts of the world, right? So that was just part of like working with that team just to kind of like build that program a bit.
Mhm. And why did they pick you as an advisor? Like, what are your expertise?
So, I mean, I don't know how to say my own thing, but I've actually worked in this field in this field of cybersecurity or digital security or looking at targeted surveillance and targeted attacks for almost 13 to 14 years. So I don't say that it was something that like I came in this space at the opportune time. So it's an interesting, I don't know, sometimes I find it interesting because I think it talks about serendipity and stuff like that. So when I was in the UK doing my studies, I actually met not randomly. My wife knew one of the researchers, and they were like Professor Ron Diebert from Citizen Lab, NOT, and Greg Walton, like who were the researchers in the 2008 GhostNet report. The GhostNet report was like looking at like a lot of the compromises that happened in the Tibetan community by Chinese hackers. So they had this really big report, which was probably one of the first major reports on state surveillance and state targeted attacks. That was in 2008. And when I was in the UK, they were, I think, at the BBC for a big interview, right? And through my wife's contact with Greg, I met them just to say hi. And because I was studying computer science, software engineering, so it was just something that I was interested in. Then what happened was like end 2009, like after I finished my studies, Greg was going to be in Dharamsala. So I had the opportunity to work with him, like to do some research, right, on cybersecurity or targeted attacks. So it kind of became like I was there at the right time at the right place. So it was just like through those connections and then the space of cybersecurity and digital security, especially for diaspora communities and like state sponsored attacks, that was kind of something that was being worked on around that time. So it wasn't something. So it was just kind of like came together in that way. So that's why I was able to come back to Dharamsala and start working with them. And then like for a few years, I worked kind of independently. Then I started working with Tibet Action Institute.
And then what sort of work do you do at Tibetan Action Institute?
So right now, I think so. If you think like my trajectory, like I started working on digital security trainings. So there was a lot of like development of content for training. So I was looking at like how do Tibetans protect themselves, right, in the diaspora? So with a lot of the attacks that we face from China, whether it's about the website attacks, email attacks, compromises, and all of that. So how do Tibetans protect themselves, right? So a lot of the work that involved in the beginning was like removing malware, trying to figure out if somebody was compromised on their desktops and stuff like that. So those were some of the starting work, and then it moved into like more like communication security because this after 2008, I think like even in Tibet, there's a lot more infrastructure, there's a lot more communication happening, there's more internet. So then there was a lot more communication happening between Tibetans inside Tibet and Tibetans in the diaspora, right? So how do you secure that communication? How do you protect that communication, right? So I think those were part of like the work. And then it was also about if you want to build a digital security resilience of a community, how do you move that forward, right? So in the beginning, it was more about looking at kind of like public awareness campaigns, right? So we did a lot of like public awareness campaigns. One was about detachment attachments, which was interesting because so there's a lot, just to give you a context, I think from around 2008 till about 2014, 15, and it still happens now. A lot of the targeted attacks that Tibetans face in the diaspora were through email attachments. So there would be email attachments with fake Google Docs or PDFs, and that were attached with malware. So attachments were the major source of attack, and that's how a lot of people, organizations and individuals got compromised. So at Tibet Action, we started this campaign called like detach from attachments, right? So it kind of works within the Tibetan context, right? Attachment is something that we need to detach from. However, in the technical field or the digital space, we also need to detach from attachments. So I think like those were some of the campaigns. And then like around 2018, 2017, 2018, we started working on certain other things like how do you kind of like take it to the next step, right? So we built something called TipCert. In 2008, we established TipCert. A CERT is basically a computer emergency readiness team or a response team. And all nations have something called a CERT. And what a CERT does, it is responsible for the cybersecurity of a nation or a cybersecurity of a company. So, for example, most of the big companies have something like that. almost every country has that. So we built something called TipCert, which is a way for us to work collaboratively. So through TipCert, it's not only about saying, oh, Tibet Action does this, like, oh, we do trainings, we do like kind of like awareness campaigns, we build our own digital security capacity, right? It's about how do you build that for a community. So as part of TipCert, we currently work with more than 50 stakeholders. So like most of the Tibetan NGOs in Dharamsala, a lot of the monasteries as well, institutions. So through that, we try to figure out how do you build resiliency. So whether it's through like policy development, policy implementation, digital security trainings, security support, incident response, and stuff like that. So that's kind of part of it. So this is more of the diaspora equation. But at the same time, we at Tibet Action, like we also work on a lot of like looking at what's happening inside Tibet, right? What is the state of censorship? What's the state of surveillance? And so whether that's collaborating with the Citizen Lab, looking at some of their, for example, looking at WeChat and how it has two different systems, one for the outside world and one for Tibetans inside Tibet. And I think it was like 2017 when it was censoring Kala Chakra, like the word Kala Chakra, it was censoring the word Bodh Gaya. So I think those like certain elements of that allow us to understand the censorship mechanisms inside Tibet. So those are some of the work that we do. And that I'm personally like overlook some of that work. Yeah.
And then how do you find out like those certain things are banned in Tibet? Are they allowed to say, okay, like how do you find that out if it's banned? Because if it's banned, then like the people inside Tibet wouldn't know it's banned, correct? Or
They won't. So what happens is like WeChat has a really interesting censorship model, right? So if you're like what Citizen Lab was able to do was like try to figure out like have two different devices, one as a global WeChat user and then as a WeChat user inside Tibet or China or inside China. And they were able to send messages back and forth and certain messages wouldn't go forth. So then they to figure out like what messages were censored, especially if you're inside Tibet. So that was a way to do that, right? Because what happens is like if someone's sending something from inside Tibet to us in the diaspora, we wouldn't even know whether the message was sent. And from their end, it would show as if it was sent. And if you're sending a message from the diaspora inside Tibet, like whether it's teaching of His Holiness, whether it's a photo of His Holiness, we might see that it has gone. However, they haven't received it because they have compartmentalized like the two systems, right? It's not just one system. So they've actually been able to separate it into two systems, which I think, yeah, it talks about how good China is at censorship.
Got it. So I definitely have a few questions, but first, maybe like to start with an overview. I remember in a video that you had recorded a long time ago, you talked about how like people look sort of down upon like the importance of cybersecurity, how like, people when, of course, weapons kill people, but then like at the same time, you mentioned that, cybersecurity or like, these technologies can kill people if you don't have like the right amount of security or whatever. It was very powerful. I'm not sure if you remember that or not, but then could you just could you just contextualize the importance of cybersecurity within our Tibetan diaspora? You've already mentioned a little bit, but just giving an overview.
Yeah, so I don't remember the actual code or remember what I said at that point. Maybe it was like a few years ago. So, but I think you actually hit the point, right? Like, because one thing is like when you talk about cybersecurity, right? I think there's this sometimes common understanding or common belief, like not understanding but belief that I don't really have anything to hide. That's one part of it. And secondly, is like what happens is just data, right? So the thing is like people don't understand the impact of data. So I think that is something that through our work, we try to make people understand, right? So for example, like when I talk about like that it can actually have real world harm. So for example, we forget about the fact that like all of us are connected. So it's not like, so for example, I can say that, oh, I don't know anyone inside Tibet. Like I'm a common Tibetan. I don't do any political work. I'm just like, I go do my own thing. I live my life. I have a regular job. I mean, like in common vernacular, I'm a regular Joe or whatever, right? And like, I'm not really involved politically. However, you have friends, you have family who are part of your network. And we always talk about in the security space, like you're as vulnerable as the weakest link in the network. So somebody can get compromised, and that can lead to compromises in other spaces, right? So that is something that I think as Tibetans in the diaspora, we have to understand all of us are connected. So like I always kind of think about like you, Chithue, and me, like we may not be directly connected, but we'll always know somebody else that is directly connected to both of us in a very profound way or very, very well connected. So we are always going to be connected to each other. So I think when you think about cybersecurity as a community, it's about protecting everyone. It's not just about saying, oh, we have to protect like the ones at the top level, right? We have to protect the Office of His Holiness. We have to protect like the CTA leadership and all of that. That's true. However, that's not the only groups that we have to protect. Like the conversations that those individuals are having, who are they having it with, and are the people that they are having conversations, are they compromised? We've always heard about espionage. We've always heard about China, how China uses a lot of information to manipulate and all of that, right? So how do they get that information? That's part of it. And when you think about like Tibetans inside Tibet, we always have somebody who has family inside Tibet. So the thing is like if you're not going to be thinking about your own security, you need to think about the security of those individuals who have family inside. And with all the transnational repression that's happened, with everything that like China is pushing like on the global scale, and the repression that Tibetans inside Tibet are facing, right? So those connections can have real world harm for Tibetans inside Tibet, as well as Tibetans in the diaspora as well, I think.
So, so how do we become like be more secure? Because like for me, like I don't really care most about like most of the data that I'm quote unquote giving out. Like I give out my email whenever, like when Apple has an update, I just scroll through it and then accept the agreement. I don't read it. Like TikTok, there's a bunch of agreements. I've heard like TikTok's agreements are really bad. You're giving them a lot of access to a lot of your data and like phone usage, but I don't read it. I don't think most people do. Is that something I'm doing wrong? Should I be reading those or should I be aware of those? Or like how do you become more secure so like there's no like those people closest to you and those people at top are safe?
I think for me, security, I think always think of from a contextual point of view. So, for example, like I think for us, it's like, okay, who are our adversaries, right? It's the Chinese government. So I think they are our adversaries. So I think from that point of view, right? Okay, are there apps which are Chinese in origin? So if it is, how do you protect your phone from that? So, for example, as you said, TikTok, right? Even though TikTok is supposedly a US-based company, it is basically the parent company is Douyin, right, which is a Chinese app, and it's a Chinese company. And if you look at like the cybersecurity law in China, like there's in the 2017, China implemented a new cybersecurity law, which basically like stated not in like in the clearest term, but it said like a Chinese citizen or a Chinese company has to spy for the Chinese government if they are told to. So it is actually in the law itself. So these are Chinese companies, right? So the question is like what they might be able to do. So that's what I usually think about, right? So for example, like I don't really have any Chinese apps on my phone, and I think that is something that I think is an important aspect of it. However, if you do have something, right, like can you have a secondary phone to use some of those things? So for example, I always talk about the fact that like WeChat is one of the most beneficial ways, right, about of allowing Tibetans inside Tibet and Tibetans in the diaspora to communicate. And that is important. We need the connection. So, but you don't need to have every conversation on WeChat. Do you know what I mean? We don't need to have the conversations that we have in the diaspora in WeChat. We can have WhatsApp, we can have Telegram, we can have other apps to do that. But to communicate with Tibetans inside Tibet, that's a requirement. So I think we just have to figure out what to separate. And I think just kind of like that's part of it. And I think in terms of like when you said about terms of services, those are really hard because like I can say here like okay, you should read it and all of that, but I mean that's not going to happen, right? It does.
Yeah.
And however, what is good now is if you look at the European Union, right, they have a really strong data protection law, and I think hopefully like in the US and others, like maybe they will implement something similar. So these laws uh, bring kind of like the power back to the individual, right? So they protect the individual. So I think a lot of times it's about building laws. So for example, in the US, right, there's a lot of debate about TikTok. There's a lot of debate about Huawei and all of that. However, there's not a policy debate. It becomes a more of a rhetoric debate, right? It like you have like senators, you have congressmen talking about like how this is bad, how this is good, and all of that conversation. However, to combat that, it can't be about like TikTok saying like, oh, TikTok is bad, right? Because it's coming from the Chinese government. So then you have to look at like, what does the 2017 law entail? What does that mean for the global community, especially with the Chinese law? So how does the US protect its own citizens, right? So for example, sort of, you are an American citizen. So it's a responsibility of the US government to protect you in this. So in that way, I think there has to be better policies around that. And right now, I think the EU has something better, but I think it's more about like there should be more nuances in the discussion and like some policy, not about like one-off things, right? You cannot say like just because it's coming out of China, we should ban it, because then the problem is going to be like China's just going to say the same thing, right? And it just becomes a bit of like I'm like I'm not saying that's not a good thing in some ways for the Tibetan cause, but it just becomes more of like this tit for tat kind of thing, right? But it should be more based on policy. Like, so for example, if TikTok is doing something like, for example, Zoom, right? So I'm kind of like spreading a bit, but like when you look at Zoom in the beginning, right, they had a lot of issues. For example, Zoom in the beginning, they weren't encrypting the data, and they said they were doing it. They had servers in China, and the people in China were able to access some of those server content and stuff like that. So those were some weird stuff that happened, because even though Zoom was an American company, and that was something that was happening. So how do you protect that, right? Through legal means. It cannot be one-off stuff, right? It cannot be all the congressional hearings and stuff like that, which is important, but it has to be followed up through policy changes, right? So I think that's part of it. And asking an individual to protect, especially from all these apps, becomes very cumbersome. It becomes very hard. At the same time, I think in terms of digital security, there's always the simple like best practices what we normally talk about is like a few things like don't click on links that you don't know, don't accept friends, attachments, always update, right? And those are certain of the best practices that work for most cases, I think.
Got it. So I want to get to the Zoom thing a little bit later. Let's hold on to that. So like TikTok here, the policy wise, a lot of individual states are doing something. Like individual states are banning TikTok off of their like federal, like, or their state phones, like government phones, which is, I think, is a good move. I'm in all for to ban TikTok, one, for because it's addictive as hell, and I don't, I see my family members wasting a lot of time on it, and like, personally, I've tried. I don't download it either because I know it's so addictive. Just for that, I think people should ban it. This is my thought, but you know, we talked about like certain things about like what the Chinese government has done, like, with the email attachment. One like example that comes to mind is that, over the years I've gone to get to know Chimilhamo a little bit, and I
Yeah.
remember when she won her student presidency. A lot of those Chinese bots just kept on like harming her on social media, harming her family, giving threats. What other things could the Chinese government could be doing, and what could the Chinese government be doing, and what are they doing now?
So I think, yeah, you've actually like, so for example, in terms of Chimilhamo, right, like especially the harassment that she faced on social media. So you could see that like how that was actually kind of like corralled by the Chinese government, right? Like especially when she won, I think, was it presidency, or was it like she was a president, right? I
Yep.
forget exactly. But yeah, so when that happened, right, you can see that coming out, because it was, but at the same time, because we saw it because it was in English, we saw it because like it was targeting Chimilhamo, right? But we haven't looked at what's happening on social media like in Tibetan. So I think that's an important aspect of it, right? For example, if you look at Facebook, there is a lot of fake accounts, like Tibetan fake accounts, like every day, like I get like at least like 10 to 5 to 10, not a lot, but like 5 to 10 fake accounts saying like, oh, just to add a friend. But I have no idea who those people are, so I usually don't add people that I don't know. However, there's like so much more like fake accounts that are generated, right? And if you look at discussions that happen and how they actually steer discussions around certain things, and a lot of that is might even be in Tibetan. And so the question then becomes is like, what is the responsibility of these social media groups, right? And they've done somewhat decent jobs in some spaces, like when they were actually like for example, I think Twitter and Facebook in the beginning, like when they, I forgot exactly the number, but like they came out with a report where they talked about like the Chinese government's state-sponsored kind of like bots and all those accounts, fake accounts that were like changing, they were spreading disinformation and like harassment and all of that. They deleted a lot of those accounts. However, reports do suggest there's probably like 10 times more than what they deleted. And that is something that's continuously happening, right? So I'm not saying I have a solution for that, but I think it's just more of a fact that like social media has a lot of that. And that is something that is harming the community because it talks like, so one thing with Chimilhamla was like, okay, that was harassment. That was trying to destroy her, like trying to make sure that she will stop doing what she's trying to do because like it is having a direct impact on her and her family. So that was something that was they were trying to do. However, in the other space, there's also like trying to create fake discussions, trying to create disunity in the Tibetan community, trying to malign everyone. So it's kind of like just kind of like destroying the unity of the diaspora community and like kind of spreading disinformation, misinformation, and stuff like that. So I think those are things that are happening simultaneously, and it can have a huge impact, right? And if you look at like social media right now on Facebook, there's stuff that like there are debates that are happening, which is on the political spectrum, which is on on the traditional Tibetan political spectrum debates and stuff like that. However, there are so many fake accounts which enhance some of those debates, right, in a way that makes it more competitive, makes it worse. So I think we don't know exactly what is being done. And I think that's one part of what the Chinese government is doing, right? And secondly, I think if you look at like the biometric data, right, like the DNA data that like China is collecting, it's kind of hard to think about what the implications are. So it kind of goes a bit into science fiction sometimes, right? Because we don't really know what they might do with that data. And that's the scary part. Because like they have like, I think according to reports, I think it's more than like in TAR, I think it's more than a million DNA collection data already collected. I don't know what they want to do with that. Are they going to be targeting people, like trying to figure out who's connected to whom? Are they going to be using it for, I think somebody said in a very interesting way that I didn't think about, like organ, organ transplant and like
Oh, wow.
all of that. So for example, like DNA collection, like all of that data. So, and then are they going to be using it for bio, I mean, like that's in the realm of like science fiction and kind of like possibilities, right? So there's like a lot of things that is scary in that space. So that's what China is doing. On top of that, I think, as you might have read, like in the Tibet, this is not the cybersecurity space, but in the Tibet Action report on the colonial boarding school, this is a whole thing about the Sinicization of the Tibetan children, right? There's almost 1 million Tibetan children in boarding schools, right, where they are being Sinicized in a way like that hasn't happened before. Like, so it's about changing Tibetans and Chinese, right? So I think there's so many aspects of that's happening. And then on the cybersecurity or the censorship and the surveillance side, like if you look at like Tibet, like or iPhone inside Tibet, like the number of apps that are blocked, the regulations, like which is a real name registration, right? So anything you do online, you need your ID, you need your real name registered, right? So that kind of restricts you from doing anything. So you can't even make a comment on a website or a blog or something without providing your real name registration. So what does that do to the human mentality, right? Does it restrict you? So then we talk about self-censorship, right? How people are self-censoring themselves. And one thing that it always kind of like makes me think about is like when Saunobla, right, in Saunobla, 25-year-old Tibetan singer, when he self-immolated in Lhasa, right? We still don't have a photo of that. And so it begs a lot of questions about, like, it makes you think about the censorship and surveillance mechanism that is in place inside Tibet and the self-censorship that it has that impacted Tibetans. So all these, I think, in a way shows the mechanism or the surveillance industry that is inside Tibet, I think, in some ways.
And then what would you say the impact of that censorship is on the Tibetan cause and Tibetan movement?
It is challenging because I think like a lot of the Tibetan, like when we talk about what's happening inside Tibet, right? I think we talk about us as the voices for Tibetans inside Tibet. However, I think like as we get less information, that also becomes challenging, right? Because China is so restricted of like what's happening inside Tibet, we don't really know what's happening inside Tibet sometimes. I'm not saying that we don't know, but I'm saying like we don't get information as like, for example, we don't have videographic information, we don't have photographic information or evidence. And there's just something that the international journalists tend to want, especially in the case of Tibet, because they are like, oh, we don't want to say anything that might irk the Chinese government, right? And so we want to have everything verified. So that's where I think it kind of harms, not really harms, but it hinders the Tibetan struggle in terms of like us being able to build the movement or being able to advocate more, right?
So what you're saying is a part of the polarization we're seeing within just our Tibetan community could be
Yeah.
because of the Chinese government steering the pot.
Yes, I think it
That's
is. Yeah, and so part of that is like the social media, and part of that is can be I think I'm not saying going to say spy network or anyway, but like individuals that are more aligned with the Chinese government, right? So there are certain things that I think it is stirring the pot. And the thing is like, and it's not something that like I won't say that there's no pot to stir because we have a pot to stir. So they are kind of like stirring the pot, right? So they're kind of like making it worse and than it is. So I think that's part of the issue as well. So for example, if you look at social media right now on especially like I haven't seen that much in English, but if you look at like a lot of the Tibetan like discussions around a lot of different issues, there does tend to be more fake accounts commenting on certain elements, and it kind of creates more debate, right, and creates more animosity. So I think that's something that is happening, and I'm not saying there's no debate, there's no kind of contention. That's always going to be there in a democracy, right? But it is being stirred more.
that's so interesting. So I guess like next time I see like a Tibetan comment, I should click on that account, seeing if it's like fake or not. See if they
Yeah.
have at least one or two pictures of their family or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, you see a lot of photos like with just like random photos, and I think one thing that like is I think what all of us can do is I think if you have fake friends or like if you have friends that are have a fake profile, just delete them, block it, because it actually reduces their impact, right? So, for example, like I have like if you look at my friend list, I've actually gone through it once to delete a few accounts, but it takes a lot of time. But I think if you can start doing it from now, which I didn't do when I first started Facebook, right? Because like you never really thought about fake accounts, right? So when someone is adding you, like, oh yeah, I don't know who that person is, but it might be a friend, so you just add it. However, now I'm making a more conscious choice about like adding people that I don't know. I wouldn't add them. I'm like not saying like I wouldn't add people that I know, but like if they're Tibetan and if they're like real, it's fine as long as not a fake account. And I think if you look at like a lot of the fake accounts, I see like hundreds of people that I know who have added those people. And I can see that it's a completely fake account. So you're just kind of like accepting friends. And you think that that is building your network, but you're also forgetting that that is also building a fake accounts network, is building that person's profile as well. So his profile also gets, or his or her profile gets bigger, and they are able to have more impact. So I think that's something that all of us can do, right?
Interesting. I respect that. Instead of making your friend numbers go up, you're restricting that. Going back to the Zoom thing, during COVID when Gyalomche started to give lectures over online, my first thought was like, oh, you know, we're doing it over Zoom. I was like, is there any like security implications with that? Why isn't there like a security implication of Gyalomche hosting teachings over Zoom?
I think so. I think in terms of context, right? Like that's what I said, right? Like Zoom, when you're doing a public one, is a very different way when you're having an internal private meeting on Zoom. So I think those things need to be separated, right? So if you're doing something public that's on Zoom, even though personally, like I don't use Zoom, but I have been like, especially now, like we're on Zoom. I've been on meetings or conferences that are held over Zoom, and that's fine. I don't really see that. But I think the context is like if you're having a private meeting, because what happened was like Zoom in the beginning, right? Like they kind of like marketed themselves as a company that was providing end-to-end encryption. that was talking about like security and all of that. And that wasn't the case. So I think that was a bit of a misrepresentation from Zoom. And that is always very challenging, right? Because like if a company says, a big technology company says, oh, we are providing end-to-end encryption, it's really hard to verify it. And the only reason why Zoom was being verified was like because I think somebody saw that like some of the data was being transmitted to China, and then somebody actually did an analysis of Zoom, a civil society group, right? And that's how we found out about Zoom. Citizen Lab did some reports on Zoom, so we found out the issues with Zoom. If they hadn't done it, we wouldn't have known about it because we sometimes take companies at face value, right? Especially big tech companies, right? We take them at face value. Like, so for example, if Zoom is saying, we do this, we don't do any of that, right? We're like, okay, fine. Because like, why would you lie? So I think we assume some corporate responsibility from big tech companies, which I think kind of like is not the case in some ways, right?
Right. And then spin-off question from that is, I think it was March or April, there's that really horrible edited video of Garamche put out there, the tragic event, that really horrible video. Um, of course, 100% I believe that it was made from the Chinese government. But then as far as, evidence, is there any way we can backtrack that it came from or was released from a Chinese government source? Or, have you guys done any
That's
study on that?
Yeah, so we did do some research on that, and like we haven't really published anything because like I think the it took us a while to do that, and I think there was already a statement from the CTA, there's statements from his private office, so I think it was for us it wasn't really adding anything to the conversation. However, during our research, we found there were like 3 or 4 YouTube accounts which first started spreading these like edited videos, and all these accounts were completely new. That was the only video that they posted, and then they started linking it to Twitter and others just to try to get some traction. So the issue there is like I can probably say with some surety that these accounts were probably linked to are probably linked to China. However, because social media operates in a way that like they will not give you data on the background, right? They already know where these accounts were made, who made those, not exactly who, but like which country, like, and like when it was made and all those different details about the videos and all of that. However, they won't share that data for privacy reasons, right? But the fact that there were like 2 or 3 different edited videos, and it was actually like most of us saw this one edited clip, right? There was actually 3 different edited clips, and all of them were edited in a way to make it seem worse than it is, and they were always trying to see like what is the best worst second that they can use. So it was like I forgot, it was like 16 seconds, 21 seconds, 22 seconds. So they tried 3 different ways, and the one that kind of like got a lot of traction was the one that we all saw. So yes, and I think to be honest, like I think a lot of the traction on social media, I think there was some that were push. However, there was some that were real. So I think where it started, I think you can definitely see there was some intent behind that to make sure that they can actually make it so that it actually becomes controversial, right? However, after a while, I think with social media, right, once things go viral, you don't really know as much.
Interesting. Um, and just to pivot a little bit, we're talking about social media. I want to read a really short, a
Yeah.
post that you posted on your campaign Facebook page, right?
Sure.
If that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. Sounds good.
all right.
I forgot what I'm just kidding. Yeah, please go ahead.
Um, and it's from the outside it might not seem like profound or anything, but for me it was like wow, Lobsang has, of course we met in person, once or twice, but then this is like wow, he has true character, because putting it in the public is it's very different. So on May 28, 2020, May 28, 2020, you wrote, I would like to congratulate Sikyong Bembe La and looking forward to working with you and your administration. I would also like to thank former Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sither for his 10 years of service. Like, I think I hopefully it's not rare in our community nowadays, but I found this to be super unique, super profound, and just like a show of your character. And this like from my personal respect to you and reverence, this is like amazing. Like I thought this was beautiful. It's a small gesture, but it's has huge impact, I think.
No, I mean, like, I think for me, when thinking back to when I wrote that, right, I think it was like, there was a sense that an administration was leaving, but a new administration was coming in, right? And well, I think I was looking at that point in the sense like, okay, there were things that I agreed with former Sikyong, right, Dr. Lobsang Sither, the things that he did, which was great. But there were things that I didn't agree with, but it doesn't matter as much, right? I think like if you agree with everything that somebody did, then it's a bit weird. Then it becomes more like a demagogue, right? Like you're kind of like, oh, like that is not even about the policies. It just becomes more about an individual, which I think is something that is really wrong. For example, like this kind of reverence, right, for our leadership. I think it's wrong. We have to respect our leadership, but not revere like our political leader. So I think I think there's a subtle difference there, right? We have to hold them accountable. So I think for me, I think it was like Lobsang Sither like served the community for 10 years, right? Chithue Lobsang Sither. And I think we have to give respect for that. And Senior Pemsala is coming in to serve the community, and we have to give respect for that and also kind of support that. So I think if you're thinking about the Tibetan movement, right, it's not about the leadership, it's about CTA. So I think sometimes we forget the fact that, oh, I will support this administration, like, because in the US, right? If it's a Democratic president, I'll support this administration because it's a Democratic president. I'll support this administration if it's a Republican. So in our case, right, I'll support it when Dr. Lobsang Sither was the president, and I will support it when Sikyong Pemsala was the president, right? So I think there's this concept of like about the individual rather than the institution, right? So I think that is something that I feel is really important. It's not about the individual. It's about the institution. It's about CTA. It's the Tibetan government in exile, right? And what it represents for Tibetans inside Tibet. And I think that is something that we really need to hold on to. And because people will come and go, right? For me personally, I'm a member of parliament, but I'll come and go. But the CTA and the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile or the Tibetan government-in-exile, the Central Tibetan Administration will remain and has to remain. So that is more important, I think.
I agree. I think it was such a noble thing for you to do. Like when I read that, I was like, wow, it was very touching. Because maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong. It's somewhat rare to see that. There's always like, even for me, not too engaged within like Tibetan Facebook or those communities. Like you hear like Chithue Lobsang Sither versus the Sekong Pemba, and there's that net benefit to be able to see the good in both, right? The good and like some, of course there's things that both need to improve on. Being able to see both sides is like truly important. Just coming to like both may be a net positive, right? Of course, they're human beings. They might make mistakes, but then you have to look at the net positive at, I think, overall. But one little pushback is that I think that people do matter. Like when I think of like just like Gyao Rinpoche or like Martin Luther King or like Mahatma Gandhi, like those people, just like their sheer pureness are able to inspire hundreds and thousands and millions of people, right? Of course, like I think we all try to aspire to be like mini Gyao Rinpoches. I think that's the goal, right?
No, I mean, like, I think that's really true. I mean, I never think of His Holiness in this space. So that's where, when I was
Uh,
talking about like this, in terms of reverence and stuff, it's more about the political leadership. I think His Holiness is beyond that. So I don't equate His Holiness in this kind of like the political debate in terms of leadership and stuff like that. I think it's beyond that. So maybe, and I completely agree with you, like, especially with His Holiness and like other such leaders, right? I think they transcend this kind of like this political kind of space in some ways. So yeah, no, definitely.
yeah. So when I told my Amla that I was gonna plan to have a conversation with you on Pidgeot podcast, she asked me, why? And I was like, he's a young Chithue, is brilliant. And Amla was like, he's not that young. He's my age. So I wanted to ask you, how old are you?
Well, I don't think I'm your Amla's age. So if I look that old, I'm like, okay, I do need to work on certain aspects of I don't know, whatever that might be. So I'm actually 41 right now.
There you go. My Amla's about 49. So
So
yeah,
maybe I look older. So
you look more wise. Maybe that's it.
I don't know
Yeah.
about that.
Are you the youngest one in
No,
Tuzor? No.
no. There's like way younger. So I think like we have parliamentarians who are in their 20s as well.
Oh wow. From where?
I think Chodak, who's from the province Amdo, like who's an Amdo member of Tibetan Parliament. I think he's in the 20s. I think there's some in their early 30s as well. Chunzi, like who's a member of parliament from Utsang, I think he's in the 20s. Tsring Roma, who's from Shillong, from Kham, I think she might be in her 30s. I'm assuming right now, like because I don't exactly know the ages,
Right.
like I've not really asked, but like I think there are a few who are in the late 20s and like early 30s as well.
Right,
So
right. Okay.
I'm in the middle. So I
You're in
don't
the
consider
middle.
that
I think you
young.
were like like middle left, middle lower.
Yeah, hopefully lower.
Yeah. Um, so this is your first term, right?
Yes, it's my first term.
Well, what made you want to run?
I think one thing was like we always like so for example, this is a conversation that I always had with my partner. Like so we always talk about like how individuals need to take up more responsibility and like how like for example when this debate is going on in the parliament, can it be more like can people talk about this issue or that issue? And then because we've lived in Dharamsala, right? We have opinions, right? Strong opinions. So just so you know. So like and you're always like, okay, like so where do you put that, right? You can have your conversations with yourself and you can have these like really inspiring debates among friends and everything, but at the end of the day it just stays there, right? So you're like, how do you move that forward, right? And I think it was like, okay, then you need to take a stand, you need to kind of like step up. And then at the same time it was also like, as a technologist, as somebody who understands the space, I was like, how can I use that to bring to the Tibetan Parliament, right, or the CTA? So I think those were two of the important aspects of me, like, okay, and us kind of like having a discussion about like why it makes sense for me to run and why it makes sense if elected, what I might be able to bring to the parliament, right? So I think those were two of the main reasons. And I think it was also about taking some responsibility and trying to figure out like, how can you contribute more, right? And I think it was always about contribution.
Got it. So before we jump into like what your role as Jittu looks like now, I'm like super interested about like your like campaign strategies that you use because um I ran for my student president.
Yeah.
So I did first 2 years at community college. I ran for student government. I won that. But then I transferred schools and at my new school I ran for student government. I lost that. But I would say I had huge support from my like local Washington DC Tibetan community. I sent out one simple email with a link to donate money, and within 1 week, from my small campaign, I was able to raise $1,500, which is crazy.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a lot.
it just shows like how supportive like, our Tibetan community is, and how much they want to see you succeed and thrive. That was really heartfelt for me. Um, but I will say that my strategy was that okay, I'm going to use a majority of that money on campaign ads on social media. However, I did
Yeah.
not know that you have to be pre-approved on Facebook and Instagram like months ahead for like political campaigns. So
Yes,
I
it
did
is.
I ended up not using any of that money and I gave them all the money
Really?
back. Yeah.
It actually happened. Like that's true. Like so, for example, I didn't realize like so I did do some social media stuff. Like it wasn't a lot. Like so, for example, there was like social media ads that you can do, but it's very restrictive, especially in terms of political. and they have like a really strong rules and regulations about that. So I think that was like what was challenging, especially if you want to do like political campaign on social media. However, I think in terms of campaign, right, in the Tibetan community, right, because we have like so many settlements, right, and because it was COVID, like so there wasn't really a possibility to travel. I'm not saying that like some haven't, but the possibility of travel was much less. There was a lot of risk of spreading and all of that. So my campaign was basically posters and media interviews, right? So basically, I was available to talk to any media and talk about campaign, talk about issues that I felt was relevant. So I was open about that. And then the second thing was like I did a huge poster campaign. Like so, a lot of my costs were towards posters. So and because like I'm not usually in the political space as much, so I don't really know a lot of people. So I kind of like just hit out people on Facebook saying like, okay, I've got posters in these areas, these places I haven't been able to reach because I don't know people. So and it was really interesting. Then I had some messages from Facebook saying, oh, I have a brother there, I have a cousin there, I'm based there. Can you send the posters to me? I'll help out. So it was, and it was people that I don't know. So I think that was very inspiring. And so I mean, like that was kind of my main campaign. It was because there wasn't a lot of travel involved and all of that. So it was mostly posters
That's super
and kind of
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, you being a tech guy and not using like tech too much. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like very old school sending like I mean like posters. Okay, you can say like posters were like you can design in a nice way and all of that. However, it was still like sending it through postal services, right? Sending it different Tibetan settlements, like having contacts there, somebody to post it up, somebody to put it up on like walls and stuff like that. So that was like the major part of the campaign.
My so when I left my community college, my cousin was actually in student government as well. He was like a senator. So he when I the year that I was leaving, he ran to fill in my spot as student government. And then, what inspired me was that all of his friends were like super helpful towards him, like, built like making the flyer for him, like, sticking, candy to the flyer, handing them out like hours of out of their weeks and, months, like to help him. And that was super inspiring. And it was really hard for I'm like, man, and like Tara, like this is your superpower, like your ability to like make all these people feel comfortable with you and like want to help you. So the question to you is like, why do you think these people wanted to, help you out?
I think I'm not sure whether it's me, but I think it's there's something about Tibetans, right? Like willing to go out of their way to help somebody that they think is uh I'm not gonna say something that they believe can do some good. So I think that's probably the better word, right? So I think there were certain individuals who thought like my kind of background and my kind of skill set would be something that would be beneficial or like can contribute something, right? And they basically stepped up, and that was it. And I think Tibetans tend to do that. Tibetans really go out of their way to help others, as you just said, right? Like especially during your when you kind of like when you send out a donate or support request, Tibetan community in DC just came out, right? It wasn't about like what do they get and a lot what will they get out of it or anything in that matter, right? It was just the fact that a Tibetan was doing that and they believed in what you do and they were like, oh, we should support it, right? And I think there's a lot of Tibetans who are like that, and that was something that was very inspiring for me, like not knowing individuals, like, and it's just like, and they were like one or two individuals who were just like during the election, they would just be like, oh, we put out, we gave this for prayers so that something successful, you'll be successful. And it was like, wow, like you don't even think about like putting prayers for others sometimes.
So It's hearing mark this as a technical difficulty. It's hearing edit all this out. It is 12:30 a.m. in the morning. The pitcher grind never stops. Maybe don't edit this out. This might be funny. Up to you two. He's hopping back soon, I think. His internet went down. All right. Saying I'm not gonna pause, okay? Because I might forget to re-record. Or press record again. At first, I thought it was my internet, which scared me a little bit. Should I go on a monologue here? Lobsang is such a cool man. Like, both like entrenched within like the Tibetan community, but also like really worldly at the same time. Like, understand and is up to date on all like the Western things. He I never thought about like the TikTok discussion within like the US government as like rhetorical versus like policy related, right? Um and I never thought about it like that. And me being in the US and somewhat involved in like politics and staying up to date within US about the US Congress, I think that was such a good analysis and observation. Um and then, I'm really not trying to I don't think I was overstating how brave it is to write that comment about Lobsang Sither and Sikkim Pembesinla. Like, him being a political leader, it might it is a political risk. He might be alienating both sides if you think about it. Um because he might be alienating both sides, because when he is saying congrats to si Pembesinla, then the Lobsangi team crowd might not like that, and vice versa. So it's a big political risk. At least, um, if you bring that similar situation back into U.S. politics, um, Mitt Romney, who impeached Trump, which is like a big move, but then his somewhat support for Biden's uh, policy and bills, legislation, uh, caused cost him his political career. He just announced his political retirement today, so it is a big move. Maybe I should tell him that. I'm gonna tell him that.
Hey,
Awesome.
yeah. Just when I said like, it's great in South India. Yeah. So where were we? I think.
We're talking about um
The campaign.
we're talking about the campaign, and like I asked you, why do you think people wanted to help you? And then you mentioned that you don't think it's you, it's rather like, Tibetan people just like helping, enjoy helping, something like that, I think.
Yeah, so I think that, as I said earlier, right, I think it's about, I think this is kind of like uh desire for the Tibetan cause and Tibetan people. Like, so it's always about Tibet, right? So if anyone is doing something for Tibet, and I'm not trying to say I'm doing something just for Tibet or I'm doing something for Tibet in that way, but I think there's this belief that I can contribute something, and so I think there were individuals who were just like, oh, based on my like my background, based on my skill set, I think there were some people who felt like this could be something that can contribute to the Tibetan cause, right? And people just stepped up. And I think it's all a matter of asking, right? And I think that was something that I felt like was really interesting. So, for example, when I think I mentioned this, or maybe it got cut, but I was thinking about the time that you talked about, like when you sent out an email about a donation, right? And you reached out, and people came back and said, "Oh, we want to help," right? And this is something that happened to me, right? Because I reached out on social media. Like, for example, I had people that I knew, and then when I reached out on social media saying like, oh, I don't know people in these areas of India in the Tibetan settlements, and if there's anyone that can help. And then there were just few Tibetans who just reached out and said, oh, I know this, I'm from that area, or I have a person there, I have a relative there, they can help out. And then yeah, it was just like people just offered to help, and that was really inspiring for me, because the thing is like it's about like people volunteering to do something, right? And not for themselves and not for their personal benefit, right? And I think that is something that Tibetans really do well. And I think that was inspiring. For example, like during the campaign, when the elections were happening, right, there were like one or two supporters, in a sense, like who actually only knew through this campaign, who actually were offering prayers for success, which was so surprising, because like like I don't know any other way to describe it, but it was very inspiring and surprising.
Yeah. I think my personal opinion, I think you and Gedula had one of the best campaign websites. Like Gedula's campaign website, if you don't recall, it like had all this policy and like beautiful like
Yeah.
animations coming through. And one of the reasons why I like your campaign website is because when I was doing my research, um, all your interviews and videos were all in one place on your front page, so it's easy. It made it easy for me.
Yeah, I think like I did use technology in that way. Like, so, but I think it was still like traditional. It was still a poster campaign. I think, I think in the West, I think there's more space to do like kind of like more technology related, like whether it's websites, whether it's social media, because Tibetans are spread globally, right? But in the Tibetan scenario, in exile, in the sense like India, Bhutan, and Nepal, we're still very located in centrally like kind of like settlements. So the traditional structure still works. Maybe it won't work in the future, right?
Mm. Yeah. My vision for Pidgeot podcast is that, when the 2025 elections come, we can
Yeah.
host if they don't want to do a debate, that's fine, but then host, if they don't do that individually, have them have like the candidates on like by themselves here, and like being able to give them a platform, an hour and a half, 2 hours to talk about like go dive deep into like the policy, like you said, actually understand the person as well. Like that's something
Yeah.
you can't do in like a 10-15 minute interview on the mainstream platforms. So that's my vision for Peugeot one day,
Oh,
hopefully.
definitely. Yeah, I think especially like, I don't think you have to do that. I think especially as you grow your audience, they'll come to you.
Hopefully. Maybe one day. So oh, what was your reaction when you first heard that you'd won?
I think, was it? Let me just think about it. I think surprise. It was hard. Like I can't really think of a adjective for that. I think it was just like, I haven't been asked this question, so that's I think in Tibetans, in my sense, it was like, okay, that part was, it happened. I think it was more like it happened. It was like, I think it was somewhat unexpected because I was someone new, like and then like there wasn't any travel, so it was mostly through posters and stuff like that. And in the preliminary I did okay, but like then in the final I did better. So I think, yeah, so certainly it was unexpected. It was very empowering in some ways because like the amount of like people that voted for you kind of also made you think about the responsibilities. So it was also about like thinking about the responsibilities. It was empowering because like it gives you a bit of a boost in terms of like thinking about like what people thought about you, but at the same time what you can bring, right? So it was a lot of different emotions, but I think I haven't really thought about it in that.
Mhm. I think we had different reactions when I when I won my presidency. I was like, I went on the floor. I was like, wow. Yeah, I called it my pala amla ashangla. I texted all my friends. I'm like, oh my god. Right. And then I was like, I took a week off. Then I was like then I started working. My community college was 80,000 people, and just like you said, thinking about the responsibility of that, and a lot of them are like lower income international students, and like I think that 1 year of me being president was literally the most challenging year of my life, because I was doing that job where I was working 30 hours a week on that job, as well as being a full-time student working part-time. But it was the most 100% the most satisfying year of my life, because then there's that feeling of service. um
Yeah.
are you getting a similar feeling as a Chithue now, or have you gotten that feeling before, doing work through Tibetan Action Institute, etc.?
Yeah, so I mean, just to go back, right? I think I was just thinking about like when I won, and I was just thinking about. I think I was just passing through COVID at that point as well. That might have been part of the reason, right? Because I think it was around in May, March or something where I actually had COVID. So it was around those similar times. So just uh, but partly not like when the elections was announced, but like I think that was part of it. But uh, I think there's a sense of satisfaction that you get, and it's very different from. I won't say it's completely different from when you're working on like cybersecurity issues, when you're working with different stakeholders, when you're working with, especially a lot of Tibetans who communicate with Tibetans inside Tibet. I think there's a satisfaction there when you work in the community, right? So when you're from the community and you're able to contribute to the community, I think there's a satisfaction there. In terms of being a parliamentarian, there is a bit of difference because it gives you more responsibility, but also gives you a larger voice. So, which I think allows you to have some impact, more impact, not some, but more impact, right? So, for example, not to go into details, but like when you're doing a parliament session, like when there's certain elements of policy that's being discussed and you're able to put your points across and you can actually see that being implemented by the administration in certain cases, that kind of like makes you think about the impact that you're able to have. So I think those are certain things that is different in terms of working in a civil society organization versus being a parliamentarian. I think it's about the impact that you can have to bring positive change.
I see. um and then what sort of policy have you brought up, or you want to see a sort of a change?
So one of the things that I really do believe in is open governance. So I really do believe like in the whole concept of like open data, open governance, and that's just from my technical point, like technology kind of background. So I think I believe in that, and I really want to see more of that. And but it's hard because as a parliamentarian, right, like a lot of the policies are from the administration, right? So you can bring certain elements of it, but then like if you're trying to do certain things, like it's not something that can be done as an individual, but I think you can bring certain visions to the table, right? Visions to the parliament. So for example, when we talk about in the Tibetan word, right, we always say chise nase, right? We always say like everything is an open book. However, just saying something is open doesn't make it accessible. And I think we forget the fact that there's a huge gap between being open and being accessible. And we have to bridge that gap, right? So for example, I'll just give you an example, right? A lot of the parliament sessions are live streamed, right? All the parliament sessions, sorry, not a lot, but all the parliament sessions are being live streamed, like the 9-day sessions, apart from some internal meetings, everything is live streamed, right? So in Tibetan term, we'll call it chise nangse, right? Everything is open. However, is that accessible? Like, so unless somebody has the time to spend 8 hours a day watching, is it accessible to you? So for example, like Sirula, so I know that like maybe sometimes you do watch the parliament, right? But have you watched the whole 9 days? No, right?
No,
Like,
no.
so that's like, yeah, you wouldn't, right? So where do you get to see that? Like, what are some of the resolutions that are passed? What are some of the resolutions that were passed during the parliament? Where do you see that? Are they accessible in other languages? And we have to understand, and we have to accept the fact that there's a lot of Tibetans who are born in the West who are interested, but the parliament is not accessible to them because it might be a language barrier. It might be an accessibility issue, right? So how do you make that more accessible? So I think those are certain things that I think is really important, and I find that interesting. So for example, like we have the election, and like the Tibetan election, right? Like a lot of the election data is supposedly chise nangse, right? Supposedly open data, but it's not. It's not something that you can find out easily. And that data, like, it's not a secret data, but it's not accessible. Can somebody analyze it? Is it in a format that allows Tibetans to actually look at the data and analyze what's going on in the exile community? It's not. So I think that is something that I'm really looking forward to work on, but it's not something that I can do alone, right? But it's something that I'm really passionate about.
Right.
Because, yeah, anyways, yeah.
I think that's something that resonates with every single member of the Puja team, because that was the reason why we started Puja. We first started as a newsletter where we would summarize like Tibetan related news into like short, like brief, like 100-word sections, like something that you can read within like 5 minutes. And we do that bi-weekly because we saw that, information at the end of the day is identity. Like information, like you said, those even in China, like those censorship things, we don't know how that's like those propagandas like brainwashing people or like having them like self-censorship, right? So like information is super important. Like the free flow of information and dialogue is super important. But then that's not available accessibly to us younger generations in the West, right? And we saw a gap there, like RFA, VOA, or like other established groups. It's very difficult for them to create subtitles or whatever. They might not have the capacity right now, bandwidth. Maybe like when like maybe like a generation two later, when there is better skills or better knowledge of English or whatever, maybe AI comes into play where they can like translate it. Who knows?
Yes.
But then until then, like there's a gap where like the young Tibetans want to be engaged, but they can't be engaged because there is that blockage. So like that like definitely like hits home with what you said. But then the question back to you, how do we do it?
So I think it's happening in some ways. Like, so for example, like the current administration, right? Senor Pemsilla, he is somebody who really believes in data that I think I find really interesting and inspiring, because like for me, I think data as like a technologist, right? Like data is something that I'm always interested in. And he has always been about like data as one of the cornerstones of his administration, right? So I think the next question is, when he talks about data, right? I think it's about just having data, right? How do you analyze that data? How do you make that data accessible? I think is a question that he and the administration need to look at. So I think and from my side, I think it's about just sharing the knowledge, or sharing the kind of like not the information, but sharing what I feel with this administration and the parliament, right? And looking at other countries, right? So for example, there was this recent conference that happened in Estonia, which is about open governance, right? And there were 4 Tibetan parliamentarians who went to that conference. And it would be interesting to see what they learned at that conference, right? About open governance. And Taiwan, who's one of our closest allies, right? They have one of the best open governance like systems in the world. They have a really interesting, robust open data community. They have a very open culture in terms of like data accessibility and all of that. They have a digital minister and all of that. So there's so many like partnerships that I see can happen. But at the end of the day, I think for me as a parliamentarian, there are certain limitations on what I can or cannot do. But I think bringing it into the conversation and bringing it to the forefold and kind of reiterating the fact that just saying like Chisenanse or like just saying that everything is open doesn't mean that it's accessible. So we have to understand there's a huge difference and a barrier. And I think just kind of like trying to hit that nail home, I think it's something that I can like try pushing for more, I guess.
Right. And I'm glad to see there is support for that.
Yeah.
What happens during those 9-day sessions? So there's 2 sessions per year, correct?
Yes. So there's 2 sessions in a year, and as you said, right, it can be. It doesn't really have to be 9 days. It can be 9, 10. I think I can't remember exactly, but up to 15 days or something on a session. But I may be wrong exactly. But like usually for the last, in all the times that I've been in the session, it has usually been about 9 or 10 days. So there's 2 sessions in a year. The first one is a budget, like the session in March is the budget session. And the session now is more about the reporting session. So what the current administration has done for the past academic past year, financial year, and the kind of what they've worked on, the projects that they have implemented. So there'll be a report on those projects, and they'll present it to the parliament, and there'll be a debate on the reports in terms of like what worked well, what didn't work well, what could have been improved. At the same time, it also allows more general discussions on different like the departments. So it's not that it has to be restricted on that. And this March session, right, which is usually for the budget, is about the proposal for the next financial year.
Got it. And I remember like some Chithue running up and down with papers, and so it gets hectic sometimes, right? Even though it's like 9-day long day sessions.
Yeah, it does get hectic, especially like it depends on like, so for example, like I mean, like when you were there, like what do you recall what was going on? What was the session about? Was it?
I don't
It was.
recall.
Yeah.
I don't
So I
recall.
mean, what does happen is like so you have the general debate sessions, right? Like where it's more about like a certain department and stuff like that. But then there's also like in the budget session, there's a lot of like budget have to be passed. There's a lot of documents that have to be produced on time so that it can be signed by and it can be passed. So that's part of it. And then like at certain times, what happens is like there might be some amendments to the charter or to rules and regulations. That is when it gets a bit more hectic, because like there's one kind of like something that is being brought by a parliamentarian or by the standing committee or by the Kashak saying like, okay, this is a rule amendment. But somebody can also say like, oh, I want to amend that. So then that gets a bit hectic because you have to do it within a set amount of time. So it can get hectic, and then like it has to be photocopied, given to every parliamentarian and stuff like that. So that is when it tends to be a bit more hectic, I guess.
Got it. And so I went to I was fortunate enough to be a VTech participant for the international meeting that we had during the summer, where 100, it's incredible, 100 young Tibetans from all across the world came to one place, and they gave us a tour of Chozo and like the rules behind it. And is it true that you guys aren't allowed to bring any sort of technology inside that room?
No. So you're not allowed to bring your phones or anything. It's like I really don't know why was that, like, so honestly, but it's part of the rules, right? And I think there are discussions about making it a paperless, like, I mean, like the current administration wants to do it like a paperless governance, right? So the e-governance. So I think the e-parliament, right? So I think that is something that is being planned, and India is actually doing a lot of that. And we also have we already have a way that we can follow someone, right? Like Himachal government, right, where the CTA is based. They were the first state government in India to actually implement e-governance, paperless governance. So, but if you see how it works, like it's still a mix of like technology and paper. So yeah, I think like, even though when we talk about e-governance, right, people assume like, oh, it's e-governance, it's just going to be the screen and no paper, nothing. Doesn't really work that way, especially in the real world scenario. But I think we're trying to implement that. I think in terms of like devices, I think it has always been the case, like, and I don't, it's just part of the rules that you can't have that. It would be interesting if you could have that, but I don't really know why it was done in that way. Maybe because like it can be very disturbing to the sessions, right? Especially when you're having a meeting and then like someone's phone rings off and stuff like that. It just becomes very disrespectful, right? I think that might be partly one of the reasons, but yeah. But I think like, yeah, it's like maybe interesting once we go like with the e-parliament, right? Will we have internet access? Will we be able to search for certain things, right? Because that might be interesting, right? So for example, if you're having a debate on a certain issue in the parliament, right? If you're able to access information at the same time about what someone else is saying, that allows you to look for more context, right? Rather than like, oh, you have to think of everything on the top of your head. Might be interesting. So I don't know.
Interesting. And can you give us a preview of what sort of topics or discussions going to be happening? Is it tomorrow, starting tomorrow, or when is it? Next week?
Oh, so it'll be on September 19th till
September
28th.
Okay.
Yeah, so it starts on September 19th. So this session is not the budget session, right? So this is more about the previous financial year. So all the departments, right? Like the Department of International DIR, the security, the finance, and like so the 7 different departments, each of them will bring out a report in terms of what they have done. And then there will be a discussion on those reports. So this is more about what has happened already. However, it's not going to be just restricted to that. So, for example, like when the debate is about DIR, any parliamentarian is able to speak about like the workings of DIR. So, for example, like there might be questions or there might be discussions on like the meeting that you guys just had, right? The VTAC one in Dharamsala. So even though this is not part of the previous financial year, it's the current one, but people can still discuss that. So it depends on which department, right? So that is probably going to be the most amount of time. There are a few amendments. Currently, I don't know what the amendments might be. So it might be charter amendments, might be rules and regulation amendments. Because like it does, like we get something called like the draft. We get an email of the draft parliament sessions. So in that, there is certain things where it is mentioned there might be some amendments, but not exactly sure what those amendments are going to be. It's only the standing committee and the speaker and the deputy speaker who have a better understanding of that. So we'll only see that when we're in the parliament, which I think is also a bit weird, just so you know. You only know when you get there, right?
Yeah, it's weird.
Like, so, yeah, you don't see it before that. So
You
that's
can't,
sometimes...
Yeah, you can't prep ahead of time, right?
You only get it the day of the session.
Okay.
So which I thought was really weird. I mean, like, I don't know whether that's in the rule book, right? Or is it just became a bit of a process and it just kind of like a practice that became kind of like institutionalized. But it's sometimes I did find it a bit weird. Like, so for example, if there's an amendment or something that's going to happen on that day, you'll get that in the morning itself, not before.
Got it.
So,
and then what is the job like outside of those 2 sessions? I know you came to DC like a few months ago, and that's how we met. What sort of work do you do outside of those sessions?
So in terms of like, so the Tibetan sessions, right? Like, so we have like 45 parliamentarians, as we know. However, because we don't have the capacity or the resources to have such a huge number of parliamentarians, right? In terms of like the capacity as a parliament that, whether it's about the financial or like all the infrastructure that needs. So there are 11 standing members that are kind of like representative of the parliamentarians, like the 45 parliament, that work full time. So the speaker, deputy speaker, and all the other like representatives. So that's the full time, right? For us, apart from the 2 sessions, right, like most of us have our day jobs, right? So for example, I work with Tibet Action as the director of technology. So that's my day job. And so there are certain times in a year where, for example, recently I was in South India, like I'm based here already, but I was in Tamil Nadu and Kerala to do some state advocacy, trying to reach out to senior Indian political leaders to talk about Tibet and advocate for Tibet and kind of like give them an understanding of what the Tibet issue is and trying to get them to kind of like support some of our resolutions, support some of our asks. So that's part of it. And then we have other sessions where we kind of like think about what's happening in the Tibetan settlements, right? So looking at the welfare of Tibetans, right? So that's part of it. So apart from that, like especially for most parliamentarians, apart from those 2 sessions, right, you do have a day job.
Hmm. Got it. I just noticed in your bookshelf you have is it Gerumbich's book? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Did
you
you
can see that. Yeah,
yeah, did you get through
I
it?
haven't finished reading it. Like I only kind of like probably like the first 50 to 100 pages. And like so it was basically about Gerum Shala's history, his family history, which was very interesting.
Hmm.
Because I
Got
think
it.
one thing that I think is important is like when we talk about the future, right? We always talk about the future and like the Tibetan movement and all of that, but without understanding the past, right? It is a challenge, right? So, for example, when I talk about like when we talk about the Tibetan movement, right, and we talk about the Tibetan settlements, without understanding the settlement story, right? Like in the 1960s, how it first came about, what were the challenges and all of that, what were the issues, we can't really kind of like bridge a path to the future. So I think Yarum Shala's book, especially in the beginning, like the first two I think sections were really much about like his upbringing, his family in Tibet, like the Chinese invasion and like the resistance and all of that. So it's really interesting to read his personal, like just to kind of know a bit more about the person, right? And I think that was interesting.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, Gerumbich's legacy is like amazing. Like from what I know, only a little bit, it's like his deep connections with the members of Congress, how they would have dinner. They're like truly like friends with like members of Congress, and that just like those like person to person relationships like helps our Tibetan cause on a big level so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've,
Um.
I've heard stories, but like I've never really met. I think I only met him once, but like on a very fleeting. But yeah, I've heard stories about him, and I really respect the work that he has done. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think yes, and ICT is continuing to do that, right? Kind of
Yep.
like live on, continue his legacy, right?
Absolutely. Your what you said about history was definitely echoed during the meeting that we had during the summer with all the Tibetan kids, international kids. They really said like it's really important to like learn your history, and they gave us like prep material about like 50 pages to read about
So
Tibetan
much.
history overview, and it's like super important. Another session that we had was with I think previous Australian Chithue I think it was Kinsum
Yeah,
Dundula.
Kinzum don't do yes, Kinzum Villa,
Kinsum
yeah.
Dundula. And then, during her session, she talked about her running for Australian Parliament. It was like super interesting. She enjoyed the process. And then she asked us, okay, raise your hand if any of you want to run for either Tibetan or local political position. And there was a few of us that rose their hands, and I was one of them. So I wanted to ask you, um, are you enjoying your job? And then what would you say to people who are run interested in running for like parliament? Or I know like some kids in Ari who are interested in running for Sikyong in the future. What do you say to those people?
Well, I think yeah, I'm actually like I'm I don't know whether enjoy is the word, but it's very fulfilling. It really gives you a lot of satisfaction. And I think as human beings, right, like we tend to think about like how you can contribute and like whether you're living a more I don't know what the word for it is, but like kind of I think it is it gives you a lot of meaning. And I think with Sejong, right, I think sometimes there's a bit of a fanfare, right? With parliamentarians, not as much fanfare in the Tibetan community. So I think there's a difference there. But I think it is meaningful. And I think it's something that, and I think what I had was like, just to kind of go back, was like, because I lived in Dharamsala for such a long time, like, I've seen the Tibetan political space, right? And in 2010, I actually volunteered, right, with Tisnam when he was running for his campaign. So I was his campaign manager in
Oh,
India. So I was doing that. So as part of that, like I had a bit of a notion on what this role entailed, even though it was a bit of a surprise when you actually go in and like see certain elements of how things are done. But I think having a very clear understanding of what this role means, I think is important in terms of like, you cannot be like, oh, I'm going to be a parliamentarian and everything's going to change. And you're going to be like, I'm going to be able to exact this. So for example, as I said, right, I really believe in open governance, right? If I had the notion that the moment I come in, this is going to happen, It's not. It's a process, right? So I think those are certain things that I already had a clear viewpoint on. If I hadn't, then it might have been a struggle, because sometimes you're like, oh, why can't we do this, right? And
Right.
sometimes with a bit of the still the youthfulness that is left in me, we're like, oh, why can't we just move forward, like just do this in this way? But then you kind of think about your experience and how things take time, and then you're like, okay, it's a process, right? So I think there were like a bit of a struggle sometimes when things don't happen, when you think that, and it may be a biased point of view, right? Because it's my point of view is like, I think this is the right way to do it, but like some people may not think in that way, right? But then you're kind of like the struggle of like, why can't you see it in that way? Why can't you do it in that way? Like, stop politicizing it. Think about the positive. Think about the institution, not about the individual. And
Exactly.
stuff like that kind of gets you sometimes. It does become a struggle, but then you also kind of like have an open kind of like, my eyes were already open when I went in. I knew there was going to be challenges, right? So I think that's where it's been very rewarding. It's been very fulfilling, and it's been a really great learning experience, honestly. And the fact that, like, as I said earlier, right, the ability to have more impact in terms of things that you believe in, I think that's something that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't a parliamentarian.
I think, it drives me crazy sometimes that more people aren't rational. Like, just thinking about like the positives and the negatives about something, right? Instead of like politicizing everything, making extra drama, making it very emotional, right? I think that's why I think it's not an overstatement to applaud you for that small text or that small post that you made on social media about Chithue Lobsang Sither and Sikyong. I think that's just a show of character, and we need more of that. Whether in the Tibetan community, even here in America, we need more of that. It's I think I guess that's my youthfulness. Yeah,
That's coming out, right?
yeah,
But I think, yeah, I think one thing that is interesting, right, especially when you said that, and especially when I remember like the first time I saw you, I think maybe it was the first time I saw you when it was with Arthur Brooks, right? And in Dharamsala, right? And the
yeah,
fact that like how he talks about compassion, right? And how he gets that from His Holiness. And I think there are certain elements of that that we do need to bring to the political space about compassion. But how being compassionate is not being passive. It's also being active. It's also about standing. So I think there are certain things about like the ethics and the morality that His Holiness teaches, right, that we can bring to the political space. And then sometimes I sound preachy when I say that, right? Like, just so you know, it kind of begins about like, can you live a moral life? Can you live an ethical life? Do you have integrity? Do you stand by certain principles? Or is it just politics, right? Because there's this global kind of like concept about like, for example, in the West, right? Like right now, like with all the elections that's happening in the US, like about to, there's always this, oh, I'm not a politician. Do you know what I mean? Because the word politician has such a dirty meaning. However, it
yeah,
is the one space or spare that actually is able to enact the greatest change and able to do the best, right? For example, in the US case, you have so many of these like civil rights law and all of that. Those were done by politicians, even though there were activists who kind of made it move forward, but the politicians had to enact those changes, right? So it's where you can do the greatest good. However, I think there's too much. I think we are losing some integrity. There's the ethics aspect of it, the morality aspect of it, the compassion aspect of it, which I think we can learn a lot from His Holiness. And I think that is something that I try to practice. I'm not saying that I'm doing it well, but something that I've always been trying to kind of like practice a bit more, and not from a perspective of like just the religious text, right? More from a perspective of like a humanity perspective. It's just like just from being compassionate to anyone, even though you don't agree with that person, right? However, that doesn't mean that you kind of take a very passive role, right? I think sometimes there's a bit of a difference between being passive and active, and being compassionate and being just covering yourself, right? So I think certain things like that, I think, is something that I really not struggle with, but something that I tend to think about a lot.
yeah. I think first of all, Arthur Brooks is insanely brilliant man, incredibly brilliant. Like, he would summarize Gauram's teaching so well live. It was all live, not he would say like Gyalrumshe would speak for 10-20 minutes, then Arthur Brooks would be like, here are the 5 things that His Holiness just said, and then summarize them, boom boom boom. Incredibly brilliant. I think he mentioned that he's read every single of Gyalrumshe's books, every single one of them, from from cover to back cover. Like, I think I've only read like 2, Freedom and Exile, and I think a Compassion one. I think he's truly inspiring. Like him, and he's not even Buddhist. He's like very Christian,
Yeah, very true.
extremely Christian. So I think what you said about bringing compassion into our everyday lives is something I incredibly agree with. Like even in politics, like yes, we need that compassion, we need that empathy to understand and to not get angry at them, but then at the same time use the dongbangi aspect, the emptiness aspect, to logically go through things and say, okay, this is emotion, okay, this is actually the benefits of like benefits and costs and benefits of this policy and that policy, and hopefully like slowly we'll start doing that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Lobsang, thank you so much for this conversation. This was wonderful and I learned so much and I had so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me, Thiru. It was a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I just want to wish you you and your team the best with the Bridger podcast as well.
Thank you. Maybe we can do this sometime in person one day.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.